They said it right there in my own kitchen. The smell of my slow-cooked ribs was still hanging in the air, a sweet, smoky ghost of the effort I'd put in. I was in the living room, in my chair, the one with the worn leather that knew the shape of my bones better than my own son did. I was just resting my eyes, not sleeping. A man of my years learns the difference. Michael, my son, was talking to his wife, Brenda. Their voices were low, the way people talk when they think they're being discreet, but are really just broadcasting their private business to anyone with a working ear. I had just spent the whole day preparing for their visit. Woke up before the sun, trimmed the edges of the lawn so it looked neat. I'd gone to the store, picked out the best rack of ribs, the good corn. I made the sauce from scratch, the way my father taught me, with a little molasses and a secret spice that no one in the family had ever bothered to ask for the recipe. They arrived 2 hours late. No phone call. They walked in with the frazzled air of people for whom punctuality is a suggestion, not a courtesy. They brought a store-bought potato salad in a plastic tub that looked pale and sat next to my wife Eleanor's bowl, the one I use for my own coleslaw. We ate. They talked about their jobs, their new car, a vacation they were planning to a place with white sand and blue water. They asked me if I was taking my pills. They didn't ask about my garden or if I'd finished the little wooden birdhouse I was carving. They didn't notice the new photograph of Eleanor I'd had framed and put on the mantel. And then, after the meal, while I was in my chair, they started talking in the kitchen. The sound of water running, the clink of plates. I figured they were cleaning up, a rare gesture I was prepared to be grateful for. But the water stopped, and the voices carried. "We have to do something about this house, Michael," Brenda said. Her voice was sharp, like a freshly honed knife. "It's just too much for him. And the money tied up in it, we could invest it. Get him a spot in that new assisted living place over by the highway." I felt a cold stillness spread through me. It started in my chest and worked its way out to my fingertips. The old clock on the wall seemed to tick louder, each second a tiny hammer against the silence. Michael sighed, a long, weary sound, the sigh of a man burdened. "I know, Bran, but he's stubborn. He loves this place. He loves the idea of it," she corrected. "He can barely manage the stairs. And what about that land he has down in Alabama? That piece of nothing his father left him." We looked it up. 50 acres of pine trees and red dirt. Then came the words, the ones that changed everything, the ones that drew a line in the sand of my life. "This old house down south is worthless, Grandpa." It was my grandson, Jason, who said it. He must have walked in. He said it with the casual cruelty of a teenager who knows everything and understands nothing. He called me Grandpa, but he wasn't talking to me. He was repeating what he'd heard his parents say. A parrot squawking a lesson he didn't comprehend. A short, sharp laugh from Brenda. "See? Even Jason gets it. It's worthless. It's just sitting there, costing him taxes for no reason." Michael didn't defend it. He didn't defend me. He just made a non-committal noise. "We'll talk to him about it next month." Worthless. The word settled into the quiet corners of my soul. I thought of that land. My father, Samuel, bought it piece by piece with money he earned working at the mill. He'd come up from Alabama during the Great Migration, but he never let go of that piece of home. He told me, "Arthur, land is the one thing they ain't making more of. You hold on to this. This is our story. This is where we come from." I remembered the smell of the red clay after a summer rain, the tall, whispering pines that stood like silent witnesses to generations of my family. I remembered my father's hands, calloused and strong, pointing out the boundaries, his voice filled with a pride I hadn't heard from my own son in 30 years. Worthless. I didn't move. I kept my breathing even slow. I let them finish their conversation, let them pack up their plastic tub of potato salad, let them come into the living room and tell me they were leaving. "Dad, you get some rest now," Michael said, patting my shoulder. A hollow, meaningless gesture. His hand felt like a stranger's. "It was a lovely dinner, Arthur," Brenda said, smiling a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You take care of yourself." I just nodded. I didn't open my eyes until I heard the front door click shut and the sound of their expensive car fading down the street. Then I sat up. The house was quiet again. The only sounds were the clock and the low hum of the refrigerator. The smell of my ribs was gone, replaced by the faint, artificial lemon scent of the dish soap they'd used. I looked at the picture of Eleanor on the mantel. Her smile was warm, genuine. She had loved this house. We had filled it with life, with laughter, with the sound of Michael's feet running down the hall. We had weathered storms in this house, both outside and in. It was a witness to our life. And my son, my only child, thought it was just money tied up, a problem to be managed. I felt no rage, no fire. That surprised me. I had expected a blaze of anger, a desire to shout. Instead, what I felt was a profound and terrible clarity. It was as if I had been looking at a blurry photograph my whole life, and suddenly it had snapped into sharp, painful focus. I was not a father. I was a caretaker of assets. I was not a man. I was a problem to be solved. My history, my legacy, the land my father bled for, it was all worthless. I stood up from my chair. My knees ached, but my back was straight. I walked into the kitchen and saw the plate they'd left for me on the counter, covered in plastic wrap. A single rib, a scoop of my slaw, a piece of cornbread. A portion for the old man. An afterthought. I picked up the plate, walked over to the trash can, and scraped it all in. The sound it made was soft, but in the silence of that house, it felt like a gunshot. It was the sound of an ending, and the sound of a beginning. I went to the sink and washed my hands. I used the bar of soap, not the liquid stuff Brenda always brought over. I scrubbed them clean, watching the water run over my wrinkled knuckles. When I was done, I dried them on a clean towel, and I felt a strange sense of peace settle over me. The decision was made. It hadn't been a loud, crashing thing. It was quiet. It had arrived like a guest who had been waiting patiently on the porch for years, and I had finally opened the door to let it in. The next morning, I woke up before the dawn, just as I always did. But something was different. The air in my lungs felt cleaner. The light filtering through the window seemed sharper. I went through my ritual. I put on a coffee, strong and black, the way I like it. The aroma filled the kitchen, a familiar comfort. But today it smelled like resolve. I didn't turn on the news. I didn't want the noise of the world intruding on the stillness I had found. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and a legal pad. The yellow paper was a blank slate. For years, I had lived my life for them. I had structured my days around their potential visits. I had kept the house just so, in case they decided to drop by. I had answered every call, responded to every text, always available, always accommodating. I had made myself small, so they could feel big. I took a sip of my coffee. It was hot and slightly bitter. It tasted like the truth. At the top of the legal pad, I wrote a single word: steps. I wasn't an educated man in the way my son was, with his college degrees and his fancy job title. I was a mechanic. I had worked with my hands my whole life. I knew how to take an engine apart and put it back together. I knew that to fix something broken, you had to be methodical. You had to have a plan. You couldn't just start banging on it with a hammer. This was my engine, my life, and it was broken. I wrote down the first step: lawyer. I knew a man, Mr. Thompson, a good man who had helped me with Eleanor's will. He was old school. He wore a suit and tie every day and spoke with a quiet dignity that I respected. He didn't rush you. He listened. I looked up his number in my old address book. The pages were soft and worn, filled with the names of people who were mostly gone now. I found his name, written in Eleanor's elegant script. I picked up the phone. The receiver felt heavy and solid in my hand. I dialed the number, my fingers sure and steady. His secretary answered, a pleasant-voiced woman named Carol. I told her who I was. Mr. Franklin, of course, she said warmly. How are you doing? I'm doing just fine, Carol. I need to make an appointment to see Mr. Thompson. It's a personal matter. He has an opening Thursday afternoon. Would that suit you? That would suit me perfectly, I said. I hung up the phone. The first step was taken. A sense of momentum began to build inside me, a quiet hum of purpose. I looked at my list. I wrote down the second step: bank. My son's name was on my checking account, my savings account. It was his idea, just in case, Dad, he'd said. Makes things simpler if anything happens. Simpler for whom? I now wondered. I thought about the money in those accounts. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. Every dollar represented a bead of sweat, a long hour under a car, a weekend shift I'd picked up so Eleanor could have a new dress or Michael could have a new bicycle. It was the physical remainder of my life's labor, and I had given him the keys to it. I finished my coffee and rinsed the cup in the sink. I went to my bedroom and put on a clean pair of work pants and a pressed shirt. I polished my old work boots, the leather scuffed and creased with 1,000 days of hard work. The ritual of it was calming. The smell of the polish, the circular motion of the brush. It was an act of preparing for a job. This was a job, the most important one I had. The third step I wrote on my list was workshop. After the bank, I came home and went straight out back to the garage. My workshop. It was my sanctuary, the one place in the world that was entirely mine. It smelled of sawdust, motor oil, and old leather. The tools hung neatly on the pegboard wall, each one in its place. Saws, hammers, wrenches, screwdrivers. I had inherited many of them from my father, and I had taken care of them. I had kept them clean, sharp, and free of rust. On the main workbench, there was a heavy wooden toolbox. It was made of oak with brass fittings. I had built it myself years ago. Inside were the best of my tools, the precision instruments, the ones I saved for special projects. I had always intended to give that toolbox to Michael. I'd imagined a day when I would hand it to him, tell him the story of each tool, of the things they had built and repaired, a passing of the torch. But Michael had never shown any interest. His hands were soft, clean. He paid people to fix things. The one time I tried to show him how to change the oil in his car, he'd stood there impatiently, checking his phone, a look of profound boredom on his face. I opened the toolbox. The tools lay nestled in their felt-lined compartments. They shone under the single bare bulb that lit the workshop. I picked up my father's old hand plane. The wooden handle was smooth and dark from decades of use. I could almost feel his presence in its weight, in its perfect balance. I took a clean rag and a bottle of linseed oil. One by one, I took each tool out of the box. I wiped it down. I oiled the wooden handles. I checked the sharpness of the blades. I polished the metal until it gleamed. It was not an act of preparation. It was an act of farewell. These tools were not for him. He would not know their value. He would see them as old, obsolete things. He would probably sell them at a garage sale for a few dollars. When I was finished, I placed each tool back in the box. I closed the lid and locked it with a small brass key. I took the box and placed it on the highest shelf in the workshop in the back, behind a stack of old lumber. Out of sight. Then I went back to the house. I walked into the living room and stood before the mantel. There were photographs there, a timeline of our family. Michael as a baby. Michael on his first day of school. Michael graduating college. Michael on his wedding day with Brenda. I picked up the wedding photo. They were smiling, young and full of plans. I had been so proud that day. I had given a speech, my hands trembling slightly as I read from my note cards. I had welcomed Brenda into our family. I looked at her smiling face. The same smile she had given me yesterday before she left. A smile like a polished surface, bright and reflective, but with no depth. I turned the photograph face down. I did the same for the others. One by one, the smiling faces of my son and his family disappeared, replaced by the plain brown cardboard backing of the frames. The only picture I left facing out was the one of Eleanor. I looked at her, and I felt a pang of sorrow. Not for me, but for her. She would have been heartbroken to see this. She had loved Michael with a fierce and unconditional love that I had always admired, and perhaps enabled. "I'm sorry, Ellie," I whispered to the photograph. "But a man has to stand for something. Or he's not a man at all." The room felt different, quieter. The silence was no longer empty. It was full of my own presence. I was taking up space in my own life again. I went to bed early that night. I slept more soundly than I had in years. There were no dreams, just a deep, peaceful dark. The appointment with Mr. Thompson was on Thursday. I arrived 15 minutes early. His office was in an old brick building downtown. The lobby was quiet, with a thick carpet that muffled your footsteps. It smelled of old paper and wood polish. Carol greeted me with a warm smile and offered me a cup of coffee. I declined. I wanted a clear head. Mr. Thompson saw me right on time. He was a tall, thin man with white hair and kind eyes behind thick glasses. He shook my hand firmly. His office was lined with books from floor to ceiling. A large oak desk stood in the center of the room. "Arthur," he said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite his desk. "It is good to see you, though I am sorry it is often under difficult circumstances that we meet." "These are not difficult circumstances, Mr. Thompson," I said, sitting down. The leather was cool and firm. "They are clear circumstances." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He was a patient man. He waited for me to speak. I told him everything. I didn't embellish. I didn't raise my voice. I just laid out the facts. The years of small neglects. The feeling of being an inconvenience. And then the conversation in the kitchen. The word. Worthless. He listened without interrupting. His expression never changed. He just nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on mine. When I was finished, there was a long silence in the room. The only sound was the faint ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. "I see," he said finally. His voice was soft. "And what is it you would like to do, Arthur?" "I want to take my son's name off my bank accounts. I want to revoke the power of attorney I gave him. I want to make a new will." He nodded again. "These things are all well within your rights. They are straightforward procedures." "There's one more thing," I said. I took a deep breath. "The house. My son and his wife, they see it as an asset, something to be sold. I want to make sure that doesn't happen. Not on their terms." "You have several options," he began. "We can set up a living trust." We talked for over an hour. He explained everything in plain language. He drew diagrams on a legal pad. He answered all of my questions. He never once made me feel foolish or old. He treated me like a man who was making a rational, considered decision about his own life. As I was leaving, he walked me to the door. "Arthur," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder, "for what it's worth, I believe you're doing the right thing. A man's dignity is his own." I walked out of that office feeling taller. The weight that had been sitting on my shoulders for years felt lighter. The path ahead was clear. The next day, I went to the bank. I sat down with the branch manager, a young woman named Maria. She was polite and efficient. I explained what I wanted to do. She pulled up my accounts on her computer. She saw Michael's name listed as a joint owner. "To remove him, we will need his signature," she said, looking up from her screen. "No," I said firmly. "I am closing these accounts today, and I am opening new ones. In my name only." She looked at me for a moment, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Then she nodded. "Of course, Mr. Franklin. I can certainly help you with that." The process took some time. There were forms to sign, new checks to order. As I transferred the money, my life savings, from the old accounts to the new ones, I felt a sense of profound relief. It was like taking my hand out of a fire. I walked out of the bank with a new debit card in my wallet and a book of temporary checks in my pocket. I was in control. It was a Saturday, 2 days later, when the first call came. It was Michael. I let go to voicemail. I was in my garden, pulling weeds from around my tomato plants. The sun was warm on my back. The soil was rich and dark under my fingernails. It felt good to be tending to something that was alive, something that responded to care. Later, I went inside and listened to the message. "Hey, Dad, it's me. Just calling to check in. I tried to pay a bill online from the joint account, and it said the account was closed. Must be some kind of mistake at the bank. Give me a call when you get this." His voice was casual, tinged with a slight annoyance. There was no concern, only inconvenience. I deleted the message. Not replied. Deleted. The silence that followed was my answer. He called again the next day. Sunday. I was sitting on my porch, reading the paper and listening to an old Sam Cooke record on my portable player. "Dad, are you getting my messages? The bank says you closed the account. What's going on? Call me. This is not funny." His voice was tighter now. The annoyance was turning into anger. He still hadn't asked if I was okay. I deleted that message too. Then came the texts. A flurry of them. "Dad, call me. This is ridiculous. What did you do? Brenda is worried sick." I read them, and I felt nothing. It was like reading a weather report from a distant country. It had no bearing on my reality. Brenda called next. Her message was different. It was syrupy sweet, dripping with false concern. "Arthur, it's Brenda. We're so worried about you. Michael said something is wrong with the bank accounts. We're just afraid you've been taken advantage of, or that you're confused. Please call us so we know you're safe. Confused. The word hung in the air after the message ended. They thought I was senile. They thought my mind was failing. It was easier for them to believe that than to believe that I had made a conscious choice, that I had acted with purpose. It was a profound insult, and it was the final confirmation that I had done the right thing. I deleted her message. Then I blocked both their numbers. The call stopped. The house fell into a new, kind of quiet. It was a chosen quiet, a quiet I had built and now inhabited. For the first week, it felt strange. I kept expecting the phone to ring. I kept bracing myself for a knock at the door. But nothing came. I filled my days. I worked in my garden. I finished the birdhouse and hung it from the big oak tree in the backyard. I went to the library and checked out books on history, a subject I'd always loved but never had time for. I took my time at the grocery store. I read the labels. I talked to the butcher. I was no longer in a hurry. I was living on my own time. One afternoon, I was cleaning out the hall closet when I found it. An old cigar box tucked away on the top shelf. I took it down and opened it. Inside were my old Army service medals, my discharge papers, a photograph of me at 20, thin and serious in my uniform. I had served in Vietnam. I didn't talk about it much. It was a part of my life that I had packed away, like these medals. But I had served my country. I had followed orders. I had been a good soldier. I had earned my place. Holding the cool, heavy metal of the medals in my palm, I felt a flicker of the young man I had been. A man of discipline. A man of resolve. He was still in there. I had just forgotten him. A week turned into 2. The silence from their end was complete. I imagined their conversations. I imagined their frustration, their anger. They were probably calling my neighbors, my old friends from the auto shop. They were building a narrative. The confused old man. The stubborn father who was punishing them. Let them. Their story had nothing to do with my truth. Then, one Tuesday, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. Grandpa. The voice was hesitant, young. It was Imani, my granddaughter, Jason's older sister. She was away at college, studying to be a teacher. She was a good kid, quiet, thoughtful. She had Eleanor's eyes. Imani, I said. My own voice sounded rough from disuse. Grandpa, are you okay? She asked. There was real concern in her voice. Not the manufactured kind. Mom and Dad are, well, they're freaking out. They said you won't answer their calls. I was silent for a moment. I chose my words carefully. I am fine, Imani. I'm better than fine. But what's going on? Dad said you closed the bank accounts. Mom thinks you're having some kind of episode. I took a breath. I am not having an episode. I'm making some changes in my life. That's all. She was quiet on the other end. I could hear her thinking. Unlike her parents, Imani knew how to listen. Did they do something? She asked softly. They were over for dinner a few weeks ago, right? After they left, Mom was going on about your house again. And the land down south. The seeing eye. She saw it. She understood. A wave of affection for this young woman washed over me. They said some things, child. Things that made me see the world in a new light. I'm sorry, Grandpa, she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. They don't see you. They never have. They just see a list of things to manage. Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't even know was still so raw. To be seen. It was a powerful thing. It is not your fault, Imani. You have always been a good granddaughter to me. Can I come see you? She asked. I can drive down this weekend. I don't want to bother you, but I want to see you're okay with my own eyes. I would like that very much, I said. And I meant it. That weekend, Imani came. She arrived on Saturday morning, driving an old, beat-up car that I was secretly pleased to see. She brought a bag of groceries and a homemade apple pie. She hugged me at the door, a real hug, strong and warm. It's good to see you, Grandpa. We spent the day together. We didn't talk much about her parents. Instead, she asked me about my garden. I showed her the tomatoes, now heavy on the vine. She helped me stake them up. Her hands were not soft like her father's. They were capable. I showed her how to sharpen the blade on the lawnmower. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. In the evening, I cooked for her. I made her my famous fried chicken, with mashed potatoes and gravy from scratch. We sat at the kitchen table and ate. She told me about her classes, about a boy she liked, about her dreams of teaching first graders. She looked around the kitchen. "It feels different in here," she said. "Peaceful." After dinner, I pulled out my old record player. I put on some John Coltrane. The sound of his saxophone filled the room, a river of complex, beautiful notes. Imani sat on the floor, leaning against the sofa, and just listened. "Why don't Mom and Dad ever listen to this stuff?" she asked. "It's amazing. They have their own music," I said. It was the most generous thing I could think of to say. Before she left on Sunday, she gave me another hug. "Grandpa," she said, her voice low, "whatever you're doing, don't let them bully you out of it. You deserve to be happy, on your own terms." I watched her drive away, and I felt a sense of hope. The future was not entirely barren. There was still a branch on the family tree that was green and full of life. The visit from Imani strengthened my resolve. It was time for the next step. I called Mr. Thompson again. "I am ready to sell the house," I told him. He didn't sound surprised. "Do you have a place to go, Arthur?" "I'm working on it," I said. "I want something smaller, simpler, an apartment, maybe." The process of selling the house was an emotional excavation. I had to go through 60 years of life, room by room, box by box. Each object held a memory. Eleanor's sewing machine, Michael's old baseball glove, a stack of drawings from Imani when she was a little girl. I was methodical. I made 3 piles. Keep, donate, trash. The keep pile was small. My books, my records, my tools, my photographs of Eleanor. A few pieces of furniture that held sentimental value. My father's old watch. The donate pile was large. Clothes, dishes, furniture. Things that could still be of use to someone else. The trash pile was the hardest. Old bills, broken appliances, things that had outlived their purpose. It felt like I was throwing away parts of my own history. But it was also liberating. A shedding of old skin. It took me a month to clear out the house. I hired a company to hold an estate sale for the rest. I watched from the window as strangers walked through my home, picking over my life, placing little price tags on my memories. I felt a strange detachment. It was no longer my home. It was just a building, a collection of objects. The house sold quickly. The market was good. When I signed the final papers at the closing, I felt a tremor in my hand. It was the end of an era. But I signed my name, Arthur James Franklin, in a clear, steady script. I found a small, clean apartment in a quiet complex across town. It had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a balcony that got the morning sun. It was all I needed. Moving day was simple. A few friends from my old church helped me. Earl, my oldest friend, who I'd known since we were boys, directed the whole operation. He was a retired foreman, and he ran the move like a construction site. "Put that there," he'd command, pointing a gnarled finger. "No, not there, you fool. Use your head." He didn't ask any questions about Michael. He didn't need to. Earl and I had a friendship that was built on decades of shared silence and understanding. He saw what was happening, and he approved. "Place is looking good, Art," he said when the last box was inside. We were sitting on the new balcony, drinking cold beers. "Less to worry about." "That's the idea," I said. The inevitable confrontation came a week later. I had just finished setting up my workshop in the 2nd bedroom. It was smaller, but it was organized. My tools were on the wall. My workbench was steady. I was sanding a piece of maple wood, feeling the grain become smooth under my hands. There was a loud, insistent knock on the door. Not a polite knock, a demanding one. I knew who it was. I took a deep breath. I wiped the sawdust from my hands. I walked to the door and opened it. Michael and Brenda stood there. They both looked angry, their faces tight with frustration. They had clearly driven from my old house, where they must have seen this sold sign in the yard. "What the hell is going on?" Michael demanded, pushing past me into the apartment. "You sold the house? Our home? Without telling us." "It was my house, Michael," I said calmly. I did not raise my voice. I stayed by the door. Brenda's eyes swept around the small apartment, a look of disgust on her face. "You're living here? In this box? After everything we've done for you? What have you done for me, Brenda?" I asked. It was a genuine question. she sputtered, momentarily lost for words. We will look out for you. We were making plans to get you into a nice facility, a place where you would be safe, a place where I would be out of the way. I finished for her. Michael stepped forward. His face was red. This is insane, Dad. This is some kind of game to punish us. Well, it's not working. You're going to listen to me. We're getting a lawyer. You're clearly not competent to make these kinds of decisions. There was the final threat, the ultimate disrespect, to erase my mind, my will, to declare me an empty vessel. The calm inside me was absolute. It was a deep, cold lake. I already have a lawyer, son. Mr. Thompson. He find me perfectly competent. I looked my son in the eye. I saw a stranger, a man I had raised, but a man I did not know. I heard you, I said, my voice low and even. That day in the kitchen, I was in my chair. I heard everything. His face changed. The anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of something. Shame? Fear? I couldn't be sure. Brenda's face went pale. I heard you talk about my house as an investment, I continued. I heard you talk about me as a burden. And I heard my own family say that my father's legacy, the land he worked his fingers to the bone for, was worthless. I paused. I let the words hang in the air between us. You didn't just close a door that day. You locked it. You boarded it up. And you handed me the key to my own life. So I'm using it. Michael started to speak, to offer an excuse, a denial. Dad, you misunderstood. No, I said, and the word had the force of a hammer blow. For the first time in a long time, I understood perfectly. I stepped back into my apartment. This conversation is over. You're no longer welcome in my home unless I invite you. Goodbye, Michael. Goodbye, Brenda. And I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I closed it gently, firmly. The click of the latch was the final word. I stood there for a long time, leaning against the door, listening to their muffled, angry voices on the other side. Eventually, they left. The sound of their footsteps faded down the hall. I did not feel triumph. I did not feel joy. I felt clean. The final piece of business was the land. The 50 acres of red dirt and pine trees in Alabama. My worthless land. I called Mr. Thompson. I know what I want to do with it, I told him. He prepared the deed. The next week, I flew down to Alabama. It was the first time I had been on a plane in 20 years. I rented a car and drove out to the property. The air was warm and humid, thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. I walked the land, my feet sinking slightly into the soft red soil. The trees were taller than I remembered. They stood like sentinels, their branches swaying in the gentle breeze. This was not worthless. This was sacred. This was the story of my father and his father before him. It was a story of survival, of hope, of building something out of nothing. The next day, I went to the First Baptist Church of Hopewell. It was a small, whitewashed building with a tall steeple. It was the church that had raised my father, the church where my grandparents were buried in the cemetery out back. I met with the pastor, a young, energetic man named Reverend Brown. I told him my story. I told him about my father, Samuel Franklin. He knew the name. Your father helped build our new fellowship hall back in the 40s, he said, his eyes lighting up. His name is on a plaque in the entryway. I felt a lump form in my throat. I pulled the deed from my briefcase. I laid it on his desk. I want to give this land to the church, I said. All 50 acres. I want you to use it for the community. Build a youth center. Plant a community garden. Make it a place where our people can grow and be strong. Reverend Brown stared at the deed, then at me. His eyes were wide. He was speechless. My son, he told me this land was worthless. I said, I want to prove him wrong. I want to turn it into something of infinite worth. He finally found his voice. He stood up and took my hand in both of his. His grip was strong. Mr. Franklin, he said, his voice trembling with emotion. This is a blessing. This is a legacy. Your father would be so proud. And in that moment, I knew he was right. My new life is quiet. It is simple. I wake with the sun. I make my coffee. I sit on my balcony and read. I work in my little workshop, building small things that please me. A bookshelf for Imani. A new frame for Eleanor's picture. I see my friend Earl twice a week. We play dominoes at the barber shop. The sharp crack of the bones on the wooden table is a kind of music. We don't talk much about our troubles. We talk about baseball, about the old days. We understand each other. Imani calls me every Sunday. She tells me about her week. She asks for my advice. I tell her stories about her grandmother. I am building a bridge to her, a bridge made of memory and respect. A month ago, a letter arrived. It was from Michael. I recognized his handwriting, the weak penmanship of a disappointing son. I let it sit on the table for 3 days before I opened it. It was a letter of apology, or an attempt at one. It was full of excuses, of justifications. But buried in there, among the weeds, were a few small seeds of what might have been remorse. "I miss you, Dad," was the last line. I read the letter, and then I put it in a drawer. I have not answered it. Not yet. Forgiveness is a powerful thing, but it must be earned. Respect must be earned. The door in my life is no longer wide open. It is closed. It is guarded. Perhaps one day, I will open it a crack. I will see if he has truly changed, if he has learned the difference between value and price, between an asset and a father. But for now, the quiet is enough. The peace is enough. I have reclaimed my name. I have honored my ancestors. I have taken my life back into my own 2 hands. They said my legacy was worthless, but a legacy is not land. It is not a house. It is not money in a bank. A legacy is the dignity with which you live your life. It is the story you write with your own actions. And my story finally is my own, and it is priceless.